All right, Seth, thanks so much for that. That brings us to the point of our discussion today. A very important document was released today called the Code of Conduct and Governance Guidelines for the Church in Kenya. Joining us live here on the bench, we'll start it early today. Bernice Gachagua is former Register General. Right next to his father, Joseph Mutie, Chairman of the Inter-Religious Council of Kenya. Right next to him, Reverend Dr. Nelson Makanda. He's the General Secretary of the Evangelical Alliance of Kenya. And on the far end, a regular guest on the bench, Reverend Dr. Jackson Ole Sapit. He's Archbishop, Anglican Church of Kenya. Very important document that came out today. Bernice, ladies first, what does this mean?
Well, thank you for the question, Jeff. This document, which we're calling the Code of Conduct, the journey to today started like 5 years ago when there was a conference at Safari Park organized by the Institute of Certified Public Secretaries Kenya and Hesabika Trust. And it was a conference that involved many professionals, other Kenyans, but was really discussing corporate governance. And in the course of that conference, there was a session held for church leaders. And one of the guests to the conference, who was a judge of the High Court of Kenya, made a statement that the biggest challenge to corporate governance was churches. And at the end of that conference, the churches went to Joshua Wadhanga, who heads Hesabika, and said, we need help. We would like to have corporate governance, but we don't know how to go about it, and we would like to have help. And what Joshua did, he got together professionals, which included accountants, church leaders, lawyers, and said, would you help us come up with a code of governance for the churches? So the team worked on this document. And for a while, there was like a lull. But as you mentioned, when Shakahola happened, the churches began to say, wow, we need to get together and think about self-regulation. If we don't do that, you know, government is going to regulate us. So really, the season and time for this document came.
Okay, let me stop you right there. Father Mutie, let me ask you this. Did it have to take Shakahola for you all to wake up?
Thank you, Jeff, and thank you for the question. It is not Shakahola that has awoken the religious leaders.
But a lot of critics will say it is Shakahola,
no.
Even though Bernice says it took 5 years.
It began even before 2018. Remember with the former AG, Githu Muigai, bringing up some kind of regulation, measures that, he was requesting that we all append to. And we said, no, we need to work together as a community of faith, as churches, to see how we manage our places of worship, how we manage ourselves, and how we see the church grow without, having government to come in and direct, on what is it that we need to do. So it's not because of Shakahola that this has happened. It's a process. Shakahola just emerged the other day, last year. We've been in this even before 2018, and we have been doing a lot. And as you've heard from my sister, there's so much that has been happening behind the curtains to get to deliver this kind of conduct.
Reverend Dr. Nelson Makanda, let me ask you this. Who is Hesabika?
Hesabika is a trust that basically, as the word Hesabika in Swahili, stand out to be counted. Started by Fellowship of Christian Unions Associates. Those who have gone through the Christian Unions in the university, they're called associates. And so we thought corruption is so much in this country, and yet we have a huge number of Christians who graduate from our universities every year. In fact, about 15,000 Kenyans graduate from the universities who are Christians and believers. But yet when they come out here, it looks like there's nothing that happened. There's no salt, there's no light. So it was a movement that was initiated to be able to catalyze change in the marketplace, championed by Christians. And so Hesabika Trust was formed about 4 or 5 years ago, and this is one of the initiatives for which Hesabika was created.
Yeah. Reverend Dr. Jackson Ole Sapit, let me ask you this. Who's going to abide by these guidelines? Who does it apply to?
It applies to all Christian denominations and churches, but also to Christian parachurch organizations and people who basically call themselves members of various churches. And the reason for the guidelines, as already stated, and I can say, yes, Shakahola became a trigger for us to be able to say, you know, what we have been working on for 5 years, we can't wait any longer because things are happening. And we had never imagined the Christian church can go to the extent of the extremism we have seen in Shakahola. So the urge now is we must curb the kind of extremism that is creeping into the churches. So it applies to churches, denominations, but also to umbrella bodies. Like he is a general secretary of an umbrella body, Evangelical Alliance of Kenya. We have NCCK, and we have the Pentecostals, and we are saying every Christian body and denomination, these are set of guidelines. We have chosen the words guideline so that it doesn't mean that we are forcing anybody, but we are setting the parameters that this is how, as Christians, we need to conduct ourselves. As leaders, because, you know, conduct is behavior. So the code of conduct is you know, alluding to the behavior of the leadership of the churches. How do we carry ourselves? How do we do the business of church? Is it personalized, or is it for the corporate body, which we call the church? And therefore, it challenges the behavior of the leaders. But it also look at the church itself, how they are managed. So you know, the other aspect of governance of churches call to mind the whole aspect of management. What structures of decision-making processes? Is it an individual unilateral decision-making process that the pastor can decide what he wants to do, or there are structures? And this guideline point to us that we must develop structures as bodies so that the entire institution is not rested upon one individual. There are a set of people who hold each other accountable, and there must be a structure that governs that church, whether it's local church or a larger church institution, but it must have structures, it must have systems, it must be managed properly, both the human and the resources around that church institution.
Okay, Bernice,
so the whole document is about how do we manage, but how does a leader behave?
Yeah. Speaking of behavior, Bernice, let me ask you this. The Paul Mackenzie types, are they going to abide by this code of conduct?
Jeff, that's a good question. Let's just say this document, this code is voluntary. You subscribe voluntarily. It's not prescriptive. And as you know, every church that is registered in Kenya has a constitution. And the registrar, when you go to register your church, gives you a model constitution and which you adopt. So this code is not coming to do away with the constitution of churches. It's not prescriptive. It's to help. It's an addendum, it's a help, and it is purely voluntary, so nobody's going to force anyone. You choose to subscribe to it, it becomes an addition to your constitution,
so you can
it sets a standard.
So you could choose or not choose?
Oh yes, when on the last page of the code, we sign up, you subscribe, but you choose to do that, you're not compelled. But the code presents a standard. It gives a standard, a minimum standard that a church must have on stewardship, on leadership. How do you use your tithe? How do you account to your members? How do you hold your leaders accountable? Indeed, it's a document that can be used by any religious body because it's about corporate governance. Yes.
Father Mutie, who's on board right now so far?
Well, as we've mentioned here, the Christian fraternity is joining hands in endorsing or adopting this code of conduct. And we are beginning with the umbrella bodies, the Organization of African Institute Churches, the National Council of Churches of Kenya, the Evangelical Alliance of Kenya, and the Christian fraternity, the Protestants. And the Christian fraternity, we are joining hands to see how we could manage together to join hands and be our brothers and sisters' keeper, so that we do not have somebody coming from outside to come and tell us, this is how you should behave. This is how you should go about your daily businesses. It's a moment that we are coming together just a church as one family, joining together and, doing our best to help our Christians grow spiritually, but also physically as we embrace each other in this faith journey.
Lady and gentlemen, I want to talk more about that when we come back, and also about the so-called miracle workers. They perform miracles on Sunday morning on TV. Who's going to regulate that? And then there are others who demand M-Pesa, send M-Pesa to this account. I mean, come on. What is this? We want to talk all about that and more when we come back. There's plenty more to talk about. And also, what are your experiences in your particular church?